They always painted me as the selfish one, the daughter who never grasped the meaning of sacrifice, who wanted too much and gave back too little. What they really meant was that I stopped being convenient. I quit handing over my money, my silence, and my loyalty just because we happened to share blood. What they didn't count on was me inheriting more than a house. I inherited the truth. And once I uncovered what they'd been hiding, there was no undoing it. I was only 7 the first time they dropped me off at Helen's place. They never called it abandonment, not out loud anyway. My mom, Diane, told me it was just for a little while, because things at home were complicated, and Helen had always said her door was open. Nobody asked me if I wanted to go. They didn't really ask Helen either. She just opened her door and found me standing there with a Hello Kitty suitcase, socks that didn't match, and my favorite book clutched tight in my arms. "She's always been good with you," Diane said as she passed over my allergy medicine and a grocery bag filled with clothes. "We just need some space to get back on our feet." I watched Helen's face shift through concern, confusion, and finally into a kind of weary acceptance. Then she bent down so we were eye to eye and said, "Well, I suppose we'd better make some cocoa." That moment set the tone for what would become a routine. For most of my childhood, I was what Diane and Robert set aside whenever life got heavy. When Nathan got sick. When Robert lost yet another job. When Diane needed time for herself, which always seemed to line up with weekend trips. Over and over, they left me at Helen's with the same tired excuses and the same promise of, just for a week or two. Those weeks stretched long. Sometimes they turned into whole summers. Once it lasted an entire school year. Helen, God bless her, bewildered but endlessly patient, never once turned me away. She didn't have kids of her own, but with me she became everything a child could need. Gentle yet firm, warm but steady. She had a way of checking if I was okay without ever saying the words. She let me pick lavender from her backyard and taught me how to press the petals flat in books. She signed me up for an art class at the community center, and then showed up to every single session like it was opening night on Broadway. That little house on Birch Hollow Road became part of me. The porch swing was my safe place. The ivy wallpaper upstairs watched me grow older, year after year. Back at home, if you could even call it that, things were a whole lot different. My parents liked the idea of family, but they hated the work it took to keep one together. They loved saying things like, "We're a team," or, "We all make sacrifices," usually right after asking me for money or reminding me how much it had cost them to raise me. My brother Nathan was the golden boy. He didn't have to ask for much because it was always given. When he wanted to switch majors again, he got nothing but encouragement. But when I mentioned applying to colleges out of state, Diane's first question was, "Who do you think you're trying to impress?" By 14 I'd stopped arguing. It was easier to nod along and pretend like I understood. When I was 15, Robert lost another job. I came home from school to find bills stacked on the kitchen table and Diane's voice cutting through the house in frantic, sharp waves. They fought for hours. 2 days later, I was back on Helen's porch. She didn't demand explanations. She just made tea and sat with me in silence. She never badmouthed my parents. Not once. But sometimes she'd look at me for a long moment before asking softly, "When's the last time somebody told you that you were enough?" I never knew how to answer. That was around the time I started calling her my aunt. Just felt right. My so-called real family treated me like a problem to manage. Helen treated me like a human being. By the time I was 16, I spent more nights at her house than at my own. She quizzed me on SAT practice tests. She drove me to writing workshops. She'd sneak $20 bills into my coat pocket with little notes that read, "For coffee," or "For poetry." She carved out space for me. In her house, in her heart, in a world where I had been taught to shrink myself small. The summer before college, I painted her back porch lavender. She never asked why. She just smiled, helped me tape off the edges, and listened while I told her it was the color of peace. I never really knew how to thank her. I tried with the small stuff, washing dishes without being asked, baking her lemon muffins, telling her she looked pretty in her old turquoise earrings. One evening, near the end of that summer, she turned to me and said, "I don't know who you'll grow up to be, Emily, but I know she'll be brave, and I know she'll be kind. And when the time comes, I hope you remember that love should never make you feel small." I clung to those words like they were a rope keeping me above water. That fall I started college a few hours away. I lived in a dorm with paper-thin walls and a roommate who blasted country music like it was a concert. I called Helen once a week. We'd talk about everything and nothing, her garden, my classes, the way the October air carried a different kind of chill. Back home, things with Diane and Robert stayed distant. When I visited on breaks, they asked about my grades like they were checking off a box. If I mentioned Helen, Diane would quickly change the subject. Still, I told myself things would improve. I'd finish school, land a job, and finally breathe for the first time in my life. I didn't know then how quickly everything would shift. That Helen would get sick. That Diane and Robert would reappear. Not with love but with demands. That they'd expect me to surrender the one thing I had ever been given, the only thing that truly belonged to me. But that came later. For the moment there was still lavender on the porch. And someone who believed in me. When you're a kid, you don't always realize what's missing until someone else gives it to you freely. At Helen's there was always a place for me at the table. Not just literally, though yes, she'd set real linen napkins in her chipped blue china, even if it was just soup and crackers, but in every way that mattered. She spoke to me like a person. She asked how I felt, not just how I performed. She looked me straight in the eye and waited for my answers like they carried weight. The difference from my parents' house was stark once I started noticing it. At home, dinners with Diane and Robert happened in front of the TV. Conversations were all business: who needed a ride, how much I'd pitched in for groceries, whether I had a job lined up yet. Even compliments came with a sting. You've lost weight. Maybe now you'll get a boyfriend. Or, Nathan never gave us this kind of trouble. Helen never said things like that. She'd say, your mind is sharp and your heart is big. That's a rare mix, Emily. Don't let anyone convince you it's a weakness. When I was 9, she signed me up for the Maple Glen Spelling Bee. I came in second. I cried the whole way home. Not because I lost, but because I knew that if I'd won, maybe Diane and Robert would have bothered to show up. Helen let me cry. Then she brewed chamomile tea and said, second place is just first place with more humility. I didn't really understand it, but I loved how it sounded. That was her gift. She had a way of making even disappointment feel softer. Helen taught me things slowly, like they were secrets passed between co-conspirators: how to knead bread, how to write a thank you note the right way, how to read people by paying attention to their eyes and their hands. People lie with their mouths, she'd tell me, but their hands will always give them away. When I got tall enough to reach the shelves, she let me help at her bookshop. Every summer, I'd work with her on the front window display. Seasonal decorations, hand-painted signs, paper butterflies taped to the glass. She always let me choose the centerpiece book. One summer I picked Clara Wren. I was 12 and most of it went over my head, but I loved how Clara spoke honestly, even when her voice shook. At night we'd read together. Helen had this old leather armchair she called the story seat. I'd curl up next to it with a blanket while she read aloud, or sometimes she'd let me take over. When I stumbled over words, she never corrected me. She'd just sip her tea and smile like I was telling the greatest story she'd ever heard. By 13, every school break was spent at Helen's. Diane and Robert barely bothered to call. Nathan, on the other hand, got into a private high school 2 towns over. They somehow found the money for his tuition, his apartment, even a used car. When I asked why I couldn't go too, Diane just said, we have to invest in the one with real potential. I never asked again. Helen knew, of course. I didn't have to spell it out, she noticed. She'd leave envelopes with extra cash marked just in case. When I turned 15, she helped me enroll in the public school in Maple Glen, since I was practically living with her anyway. I didn't fight it. By then, I'd stopped pretending Diane and Robert would ever become the kind of parents who packed lunches or remembered choir recitals. Helen packed me a lunch every day, even when she was busy running the shop. She always slipped in little notes. Don't dim your light. Books make good armor. You're allowed to take up space. At school I didn't have many friends. Nobody bullied me, I just didn't know how to get close to people. I'd been raised to believe my only value was in being useful, agreeable, invisible. I trained myself to shrink to fit whatever mood was in the room. But with Helen I didn't have to. She noticed when I looked tired. She asked if I was eating enough. She kept lavender by my pillow because once I'd mentioned it helped quiet the nightmares. One winter she taught me how to knit. I was awful at it. Dropped stitches everywhere, uneven rows. but I managed to make a lopsided blue and gray scarf. She wore it all season without a single complaint. That spring, Nathan came by for the first time in years. He stayed one weekend, grumbled about the bad internet, and told me I was lucky to be living rent-free. Helen offered him tea. He turned it down. That night, I found her sitting on the back porch in silence. "He's angry," she said finally. "But not at you." "I know," I told her. "He's mad that I got something he didn't, even if he never actually wanted it." Helen looked at me then, her eyes soft but steady. "Love can't be rationed, Emily. But people will try. Especially the ones who never learned how to give it." That line stuck with me. Years later, it echoed in my head when Diane accused me of hoarding the inheritance. But we weren't there yet. Not then. Back then it was still safe. Tea on the porch. Spelling bees. Sunlight spilling across the steps. It was the quiet kind of love, the kind that lets you breathe. And for a little while that was enough. Helen sometimes called Nathan the golden one. She'd say it with a smile and a small shake of her head, though I think even she wondered if that shine was real or just polish. Nathan was 2 years younger than me, bright, curly-haired, and effortlessly charming in that way people get when they've never had to beg for attention. He wanted for nothing. Summer camp at Walnut Ridge, guitar lessons, eventually an art school near the city. Diane and Robert paid for all of it without hesitation. Meanwhile, I was working night shifts at the bookstore, scrambling to keep up with student loans, convinced that whatever college savings existed had already gone to fuel Nathan's so-called potential. Around my parents, I'd learned to whisper, to keep myself small enough not to cause trouble. One afternoon when I was 19, I was in the kitchen with Helen while she brewed tea. From the parlor, I overheard Diane and Robert on speakerphone, voices crackling through. "I've told you," Robert said quietly. "They have to finish that visa program. That's top priority. Emily will understand." Diane's sigh followed. "Yes, but you'll have to remind her. Emily's always been very accommodating." Later that week, I came home from class to find Nathan had a brand new laptop. My help had covered the cost. Diane smiled and said, "Nathan's so lucky you were there to pick it up. What a generous sister." I smiled back, even hugged him. But inside I felt empty, because I knew I had helped raise him this way. To expect, to demand, to take without guilt, until the very idea of needing something no longer felt heavy to him at all. Helen must have known. I never said a word, but weeks later she slipped a knitted bookmark, made from scraps of leftover yarn, into my poetry journal. She leaned close and whispered, "Some gifts are meant to remind you of worth, not payment." That same summer, I began to notice her slowing down. The lavender light in her eyes dimmed. She grew tired easily, her hands trembling as she poured tea, sentences trailing off halfway through. The diagnosis, early onset Alzheimer's, hit me like betrayal. I took a leave from school. She was upset with me at first. She wanted me to keep going. "Promise me you'll go back," she said through tears. "I will," I told her. I moved into her house in town. I took over the shop's bookkeeping, cooked her meals, read her letters out loud, and every night, after tucking her into bed, I'd sit on the porch swing, suffocating under a grief that was already taking root. Helen passed on a Sunday morning. I never knew a house could echo with absence, but once she was gone it did. It echoed in the floorboards that no longer carried her step, in the kettle left cold on the stove, in the unopened mail addressed in that looping old-fashioned cursive. Helen Marie Whitaker. The hospice nurse called it a peaceful passing. She'd taken a warm bath, fallen asleep, and never woke up. I was in the kitchen making chamomile tea when it happened. For a long time I hated myself for not being there. But Helen wouldn't have wanted me to watch her slip away. She always believed in quiet exits. The days after blurred together. Neighbors offering condolences, casserole dishes I never touched, stacks of legal papers I couldn't face. A week after the funeral, the lawyer, Mr. Kaplan, sat me down. "Helen left her estate to you, Emily. The house, the bookstore, everything." I blinked. "All of it." She was very clear. "No liens, no debts. It's yours. She also left this." He slid over a plain manila envelope. Inside was a flash drive. "She said you'd know when to open it." Mr. Kaplan went over the details with crisp efficiency. All estate matters would go through his office, not directly through me. He advised setting up a P.O. box, opening a bank account in my name only, redirecting all mail. He told me to keep a record of every call, letter, or message from Diane and Robert, so nothing could be twisted later. For the first time, I felt like there was some barrier between me and them, thin but real. That night, after the house went dark, I sat at the oak desk in the living room. I plugged in the flash drive and opened the folder labeled for Emily. Inside were PDFs, scanned letters, loan receipts, bank statements. And then it hit me all at once, the weight of everything I never knew. My parents had borrowed tens of thousands from Helen over the years. Tuition checks marked for Nathan. Payments labeled housing assistance. They'd never told me. They took her money and funneled it straight to my brother. All while letting me believe there was nothing. That I was too costly, too needy, too much. And still Helen had tried. Even through them, she had tried to carve out some kind of life for me. I sat there for hours, staring at the evidence of my childhood rewritten in PDFs and scanned slips of paper. That's when I found the letter. Helen's handwriting, slanted and steady. Dearest Emily, I know you'll find this when I'm no longer here to explain, but I want you to understand why I left everything to you. It isn't out of spite. It's out of clarity. I've watched you give so much to people who've only taken. I couldn't let you enter adulthood thinking love equals sacrifice. This house, this shop, this life, it's yours. Not to prove anything. Not to repay anyone. Simply because you are worthy. You were always the one who stayed. The one who cared. The one who saw me when I began to fade. Don't let them rewrite you. Don't hand them the pen. With all my love, always. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. For the first time in my life, I felt something I didn't recognize. Raw grief tangled up with a love that asked nothing of me. And in that stillness, I made myself a promise. They wouldn't take this from me. Not again. They showed up without warning. I was in the backyard raking leaves when I heard the slam of a car door. I looked up toward the driveway. The afternoon sun glared off a silver SUV, looked like a rental. Then I saw her. My mom stepping out in a pastel windbreaker, holding a Tupperware like it was an offering. My dad followed behind, lugging 2 suitcases as if he were checking in for a long weekend. My stomach sank. Well, this is cozy, Mom said with a little smile, glancing at the porch. Still smells like her, Dad added, not unkindly. I didn't move. Just gripped the rake tighter, like it might somehow protect me. I wish you'd told us she passed, Mom said softly, like I was the one who had betrayed her. I did, I told her. I sent an email. And the obituary link. She blinked, almost blank. Oh, I must have missed it. I stayed quiet. Just watched as they walked up the steps and let themselves inside. Inside it started. They touched everything, running their hands along bookshelves, tables, the old roll-top desk. Mom tugged the curtains open in the living room. Too dark in here, she said. Some warm neutrals would brighten the space. Dad drifted into the back room. This could be a guest suite, he said thoughtfully. Rent it out, bring in a little extra cash. I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping a mug of tea like it could anchor me. They stayed for 4 long days. They brought groceries I didn't ask for. Rearranged the pantry. Offered to help with the legal stuff. Though I reminded them everything was already handled through Mr. Kaplan. Each time I wrote down the date and their exact words just like he told me to. At dinner, the house became their target. Don't get me wrong, Mom said, slicing lasagna. This place has charm, but it's a lot to keep up. Have you thought about selling? You could buy something smaller, Dad added. Closer to Denver. You'd make a decent profit with this location. I'm not selling, I said flatly. The silence that followed cut sharp. Well, Mom said at last, we just want what's best for you. Later that night I found her in the study, clicking through my laptop. She shut the screen too fast when she saw me. Just checking the weather, she chirped. I didn't believe her for a second. By day 4, the politeness wore thin. I've been meaning to ask, Dad said over breakfast. With Nathan finishing his program, he might need a little help. Rent's steep these days. I stared. You're asking me to support him? He shrugged. Just brainstorming. Mom smiled carefully, searching my face. I always told Helen you'd be the one to hold this family together. Something inside me cracked. I pushed my chair back. I'm going for a walk, I said. Alone. And I left before they could follow. Out in the woods behind the house, the trees blazed gold and amber. I walked until their voices faded from my head. Until I could remember the truth. This place was mine. Not a charity handout. Not a family asset. It was a gift. Promise. A boundary that finally belonged to me. When I got back, the house was still. They were packing. No apology. No hugs. Just a flat, "We'll talk soon." I stood there and watched them drive off. And I knew deep down they'd be back. I hadn't talked to Nathan in weeks. We were never close the way some siblings are. He'd always been the golden child. The piano lessons, the private school, the one who got the best while I rode buses and ate dinners laced with guilt. But he wasn't mean. Just absent. Wrapped up in his own orbit. That's why the voice message he sent caught me off guard. It was an audio clip. I could hear the background noise. Clinking glasses, people laughing, silverware scraping plates. Then my mom's voice. She actually bought it, can you believe it? A chuckle followed. My dad. Hook, line, and sinker. Guilt always works on her. My chest locked up. She'll wear herself out in that old house, Mom continued. We'll let her play independent until she's too tired. Then step in. Offer to help. Take control. She won't fight, Dad added. She never does. And once she's married? Mom laughed. We'll guilt the husband too. Easy. Their laughter filled the recording, cruel and casual. The kind of sound that makes the world tilt under your feet. I hit pause. Then I played it again. And again. Until I couldn't anymore. I sat in silence for hours. No tears. No yelling. Just unraveling. Thread by thread, the idea of family I had been holding on to disintegrated into something ugly, something I couldn't recognize. They never wanted to help. They wanted to claim. To control. To drain me dry. Helen's gift wasn't a legacy to them. It was a loophole. A chance to take. And the sickest part? I had almost let them. If not for Nathan. That night I started a new list. Call my lawyer. Freeze the accounts. Redirect the mail. Change my number. Put the house on the market, quietly, quickly. I didn't call Nathan. Not then. But I saved his voicemail and copied it out by hand into my journal. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally saw it for what it was. He hadn't known before. But now he did. And he chose to tell me. That counted for something. I didn't tell Sam. I didn't tell Nathan. I didn't even admit it to myself, not out loud, that I was leaving. But my body already knew. It moved with quiet precision, steady and deliberate, like surgery. I called my lawyer, the same woman who'd handled Helen's estate. She was discreet, calm, and sharper than anyone gave her credit for. I need to sell the house, I said. And I need it handled quietly. She didn't flinch. I'll take care of it, she told me. We'll keep it off the market. After that, I opened a new bank account in another city. Moved the funds. Redirected the mail. Paid cash for AP. O box. Rented a storage unit under a new name, Helen L. Books, LLC. Felt like something out of a movie. It also felt absolutely necessary. Most people get emotional selling a home. But not me. Not after everything. Not after that voicemail. Not after a lifetime of conditional love, guilt trips, and sacrifices that only ever bled one way. I still heard their laughter sometimes, the way Mom had said, guilt always works on her. Like she was reading a menu. I didn't cry when the house went up for sale. I didn't cry when the first offer came in. But I broke down the night before the movers showed up. Because it had been Helen's place. Because the porch light still flickered in the evening like it was waiting for her. Because up in the attic, her favorite mug, the one that read Book Witches Do It with Spells and Shelves, was still wrapped in tissue paper I couldn't bring myself to open. I gave myself one night to grieve. And then I packed up and left. My parents still had no idea. I blocked them everywhere. Changed my number. Wiped my digital trail. I left my lawyer with a single letter. If Diane or Robert contacted her, she'd send back one response. Emily Carter has exercised her legal rights in full accordance with her inheritance. She requests no further contact. Any attempt to dispute her decisions will be met with legal recourse. It was printed on heavy stationery, the kind that doesn't threaten. It concludes, at 4:37 in the morning, I drove out of Maple Glen. The Civic was loaded: books, journals, 3 boxes of Helen's hand-labeled tea jars. I didn't look back. No one stood to wave goodbye. No one but me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The first night in my new place, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the mattress, though it squeaked whenever I moved, or the streetlight outside that flickered like a broken firefly. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that used to mean something was wrong. In my parents' house, silence was never just quiet. It meant punishment. It meant I'd crossed some invisible line. Talked too much, not enough, or failed to follow whatever unspoken rule they decided on that day. Now silence was just silence, and I had no idea what to do with it. The apartment was temporary, furnished but barely. A short-term rental across state lines, booked under a name I hadn't used in years: Emily J. Dawson. The name Helen always scribbled on postcards when she mailed them from little bookshops she discovered. It smelled like lemon cleaner mixed with something metallic. I set my suitcase down and stood in the middle of the room for a long time, hugging my arms around myself like I needed a human anchor. I hadn't truly escaped. Not yet. I'd only stepped off the stage. Rachel, my therapist, told me that was normal. Your body's still stuck in fight or flight, she said during a Zoom call, her voice soft and steady like waves on sand. It doesn't know the danger's gone. I didn't believe her, but I wrote it down anyway. Every day, I forced myself to write one truth I couldn't say out loud. They didn't protect me. They protected their comfort. I wasn't selfish. I was surviving. Love doesn't make you small. Help isn't love. Guilt isn't love. Control isn't love. Some days I filled pages. Other days I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing at all. The calls kept coming. 67 times in 2 weeks. Different numbers. Landlines. Even Nathan's phone. I never answered. Finally, my mom left a voicemail I couldn't ignore. We're coming to Maple Glen. We need to talk. We deserve answers. I saved it. Sent it straight to my lawyer. She called within minutes. They don't realize the house is sold, she said. No, I told her. But they will soon. So I wrote them a letter. Typed. Formal. Plain. I told them the house had been sold. That they had no claim. That I required no further contact. And any future attempt must go through my lawyer. I signed it MS. Emily J. Dawson. They would understand exactly what that meant. What I didn't send but drafted anyway was this. You told me love meant sacrifice. That being a daughter meant giving without question. That family meant I should wear my suffering like a badge of pride. But love, real love, doesn't feel like a choke collar. It feels like lavender and quiet mornings and someone reminding me, you are becoming. And I'm not going back. I hadn't wanted to face them again. Not after the letter. Not after the voicemail. But they didn't stop. Even after I moved, even after I blocked every number, they found ways to slip through the cracks. Emails from burner accounts, voicemails from Nathan's phone, letters sent to my lawyer that started as requests and turned into demands. They hadn't changed. They were just regrouping. Rachel, my therapist, told me once that sometimes the most powerful move is choosing the battlefield. Controlling the terms. Naming your boundary out loud. Not for them but for yourself. So I told my lawyer to send one final message. I will meet you once. Public place. 1 hour. After that, communication ends forever. We met at a diner off Route 46. Neutral ground. Fluorescent lights. No charm, no nostalgia. I picked it for its sterility, for being a place where nothing of me had ever existed. I showed up 10 minutes early and slid into a booth in the corner. Back to the wall, eyes on the door. The waitress poured me coffee I didn't order. I thanked her anyway. When my parents walked in, they looked startled, almost disoriented. Like they'd been expecting the old version of me. The quiet daughter who apologized too fast, who said yes without thinking. But that wasn't who they found. Emily, Mom said, smiling like plastic wrap. You look thin. Dad sighed, practiced and weary. Let's not waste time. This could have been handled better. You don't get to start, I said evenly. You're not in charge here. The silence that followed was heavy. I pulled out my phone. I want you to hear something. It was the recording Nathan had stumbled across. The one he couldn't believe at first, the one he'd replayed 3 times before forwarding it to me with a short message. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. The audio filled the space with their laughter. Mom's voice, crisp and smug. She'll sign anything if you make her feel guilty enough. Dad's voice followed. Give it a year. She'll be so worn down, she'll beg us to take it off her hands. And Mom again. Or she'll get married. We can guilt the husband too. When it ended, the diner was quiet again. Just the sound of dishes clinking somewhere in the kitchen. Coffee being poured at a nearby table. Mom's eyes were glossy, but not with shame. Just the sting of being caught. You're taking that out of context, she said quickly. We were joking. No, I said. You were strategizing. About how to bleed me dry. Again. Dad snapped sharper now. You wouldn't even have that house if not for us. No, I said steady. I wouldn't have this trauma if not for you. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table. Inside were the deed, the sale confirmation, and a typed statement from my lawyer verifying all ownership transfers. I sold it, I said simply. It's done. Their mouths dropped. You're just going to throw your family away? Mom whispered. I'm reclaiming myself, I said. You spent years teaching me that love meant sacrifice. That to be good, I had to be empty. I stood. I'm done being emptied. I left the folder behind. Left the coffee. Left them sitting there. Then I walked out into the sharp afternoon air. My heart pounding so hard it shook in my chest. It didn't feel like triumph. Felt like freedom. Raw, shaky, terrifying. But mine. After that meeting at the diner, I thought I'd feel lighter, maybe even victorious. Instead, I just felt hollow. I'd spent my whole life chasing their love. And the last year trying to unlearn that they never gave it. Standing up to them didn't erase the scars. It only stopped the bleeding. Healing, I realized, wasn't a single moment. It was more like a long, quiet walk through unfamiliar woods. With no map, no compass. Just the sound of my own voice reminding me I was still here. I started pouring everything into a journal. Not some curated one with affirmations and pastel stickers. Just a cheap spiral notebook, messy and raw. The pages filled with shaky lines of grief and sharp streaks of rage. But every word was mine. That's where the workshop idea came from. It started with one sentence I scribbled after therapy. No is a full sentence. The next page carried more. Love isn't financial dependence. Family doesn't mean ownership. I don't owe anyone my silence. I shared it with Rachel. She tilted her head. A support group? A workshop, I corrected. Nothing formal. Just women talking. Maybe I'm not the only one who grew up mistaking guilt for love. Her smile was small but steady. You won't be. 2 weeks later, I booked the library's community room. It wasn't much. Beige walls, scratchy carpet, folding chairs that squeaked when you shifted. But it was safe. Ours. 7 women showed up the first night. I brought cookies, tea bags, and my notebook. Standing at the front, my heart hammered like I was about to fall apart. I told my story, not every detail, just the shape of it. Enough to say, you're not crazy. You're not alone. They nodded. They listened. Some wiped away tears. By the end, one woman raised her hand. Can we do this again? That was the beginning. I called it no as a full sentence. Each week more women came. Some brought friends. One printed flyers. Another slipped me a few dollars for tea. We talked about guilt. About parents who dressed control up as help. About daughters asked for rent while their brothers got bailed out. We shared grief. Anger. But also something softer, hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Then Nathan reached out. A late-night text after one of the sessions. Just 5 words. Can we talk this weekend? I hesitated, then typed back. Yes. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between us. No parents. No games. He looked different, older, worn down in ways that mirrored my own. We ordered coffee. His sat untouched. They lied to me, he said right away. They told me you wanted to go to Aunt Helen's. That you loved being away. I didn't know. I stayed quiet. His eyes lifted to mine. I'm sorry, Emily. I should have asked. I should have noticed. I swallowed. You believed what they told you. He nodded. Yeah, but I don't anymore. That changed everything. For the first time in years I felt like I had a brother, not a rival, not a pawn. Someone who had also been used. Someone finally trying to see the truth. He asked questions. He listened. And before we left he said, "If you ever want help with your workshops, I'd like to support you." I smiled. I'd like that too. That night I sat out on my balcony with a cup of tea, staring at the city lights. And for the first time the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of voices. Of change. Of women finally finding their words, me included. 3 days after Nathan left, after our long talk on the porch, after that hug that said more than any apology could, I was starting to breathe easier again. That's when I opened my P.O. box and found the package. No return name, just a handwritten address from Maple Glen. Helen Street. Inside was a wooden box and a short note. "Emily. She saved these. I think she meant for you to have them. Laura." Helen's sister. The one who'd come to a workshop once, the one who knew more about my family than I ever did. She had her own way of quietly keeping watch. I set the box on my table and just stared at it for a while. Then I lifted the lid. It was full of letters. Dozens of them, all in Helen's handwriting. Some yellowed, some still crisp. None of them had ever been mailed. The oldest was from the summer I turned 10. The first time my parents dropped me off without saying when they'd be back. I'd cried myself sick for 2 nights until Helen built me a blanket tent in the living room and read Lucy Vale aloud until I could sleep. Her letter from that week started. "Emily is already stronger than she knows. Her parents don't see it. Maybe they don't want to." Some were written to me. Others read like journal entries. Every single one told the truth about my childhood. How often I was left behind. How many excuses my parents made. How Helen stopped being a stand-in and became my only real home. One letter described a night I'd half forgotten, me asking if I could just live with her forever, and Helen sitting up until 3 in the morning trying to figure out how to make it possible. Another said, "They told me she wanted to be here. That it was her idea. But Emily is a child. She just wanted to feel wanted." I read every word. And I cried through most of them. I ended up on the floor surrounded by pages, the truth of my life finally written down. All the guilt I'd carried for years started to loosen. She had seen everything. And she had loved me anyway. One of the last letters was dated the year before she died. Short and simple. "I hope when she finds this she knows I chose her. Not out of pity, but out of pride." That night I called Nathan. He showed up with takeout and we sat on the floor, reading through the letters together. He didn't say much. Just held each page like it was something sacred. "I never knew," he whispered. "They always said you liked going. That you needed more than they could give." I looked at him. "They told me I wanted to leave." He nodded slowly. "They made me believe you were just different. Dramatic. Too sensitive." "I wasn't," I said. "I just didn't know how to act like it didn't hurt." Before leaving, Nathan rested his hand on the box lid. "She really did love you, didn't she? She's the reason I know what love even is," I told him. He didn't argue. He just hugged me again, tighter this time, and said, "If there's anything I can do, I mean it." "You're doing it," I said. I placed the wooden box on my bookshelf, tucking it between Little Women and a beat-up poetry collection Helen once said was too sad, and therefore necessary. On the spine I wrote in gold ink, "Helen's heart." That night, for the first time in months, I slept with the window open. A year had passed. 12 months since I'd handed over the keys. Since I'd driven away from the house on Birch Hollow Road with a packed car and a note left on the table. Since I walked out of a life built on guilt, fear, and obligation. Exactly 365 days since I stopped answering to their version of me. I marked the date quietly. No ceremony, no fancy meal. Just a sunrise drive to Maple Glen, black coffee in the thermos Helen always swore poured best, and a bundle of lavender tied with twine. Helen's grave sat under a sugar maple, the grass neatly trimmed. Someone, probably Laura, had left a little ceramic owl by the stone. I laid the lavender down gently and sat cross-legged on the ground. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just breathed. Then I pulled a folded letter from my coat pocket. I'd written it on the last piece of floral stationery I found in Laura's box. Helen's kind, the kind she used for years. Felt right. I hadn't planned to leave it. Maybe not even read it aloud. But the words had poured out the night before, as I sat on the floor beside the wooden box, thinking about everything she saw in me, and everything I finally saw in myself. I opened it. Dear Aunt Helen, it's been a year. I wanted to tell you I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm free. It's still strange, this kind of freedom. Like wearing someone else's coat until it slowly becomes your own. But I'm learning. The house is gone, but the space you gave me still lives in me. The shelves at the shop. The lavender on the porch. The quiet way you listen without ever needing to fix me. I think that's what real love is. Not fixing. Just witnessing. Staying. You stayed. And because of that I stayed too in myself in this life. They don't know where I am. They don't control me anymore. Nathan and I talk now. We're building something honest, something we were never allowed to have. He's seen the letters. He knows the truth. He cried when he realized how much you fought for me. I'm working again. Not just at a job, but at something I believe in. The workshops are growing, filled with women who are finally finding their voices after years of being told they were too much, too needy, too costly. I used to think healing meant forgiving them. But it doesn't. It means choosing myself anyway. You taught me that. Quietly. Fiercely. Fully. I miss you every day. But now I carry you with me. Not as a wound but as a root. Love always. Emily. I folded the letter, pressed it against my chest, then slipped it back into my pocket. I didn't need to leave it behind. She already knew. I lingered there, watching the wind ripple through the trees, scattering golden leaves across the ground. I thought of all the summers we'd shared. The way she hummed while cooking. The little gold bell above the bookstore door. The afternoon we painted the porch lavender just because she said it looked like joy. And sitting there I realized this moment felt the same. Not heavy. Not bitter. Just joy steady earned and mine. A month later, the rhythm of life felt solid. My workshops were growing, my relationship with Nathan was mending. And for the first time I felt settled. Then the voicemail came. It landed on my new phone from an unmarked number. I almost deleted it. But instead I pressed play. In the background of the voicemail, a woman's laugh. Then a man's voice. Are you sure she didn't change her mind? Positive. She's staying put. But I think she's wavering. Maybe it's time to remind her who we are. Yes, talk to Nathan. He's still close enough. If he calls, you step in. Don't let her decide this without us. The words cut deep. Talk to Nathan. Not for him, but through him. Another attempt to drag me back, this time by reaching for my brother. Nathan was sitting beside me when it played. I watched the color drain from his face, his jaw tightening. He hit delete, then looked straight at me. They're still trying to use me, he said quietly. They told me I'd always listen. That I'd pull you back. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee. They don't think you deserve this. Or that we deserve to be free. But they don't talk to me either. They lied to me too. This time I didn't retreat. I reached across the table and took his hand. You did the right thing, I told him. He nodded, eyes down. I'm sorry I believed them. You didn't know, I said softly. Now you do. And that changes everything. The rest of the day passed quietly. No tears. No anger. Just resolve. Together we decided. Any future messages would be ignored or forwarded straight to the lawyer. No more cracks left open. That night I wrote in my journal. It's not just about me anymore. It's about us. I don't have to be their daughter. Nathan doesn't have to be their son. We get to be siblings. Whole and free. This is the last thread. And I'm ready to let go. When I closed the journal and turned out the lights, I felt it, my life was finally mine. Spring came early that year. I was stacking chairs after our biggest workshop yet, more than 60 women, when Laura appeared at the door. I was cleaning out some of Helen's things, she said. Found this. Thought you should have it. She handed me a journal, bound in soft leather, Helen's name etched in gold. She started it the year before you were born, Laura added. At home I opened it. The entries weren't daily. Some pages filled, others just a line or two. But every word carried her voice, sharp, observant, kind. Halfway through, one entry stopped me cold. April 14th. They dropped her off again. No warning. No note. Just a suitcase and a guilty smile. She didn't cry. Just sat on the porch and asked if we could make lemon tea. She's only 5 and she already knows what not to ask for. I will not let her think she is disposable. She is a symphony pretending to be background music. If no one else listens, I will. I closed the book and let those words sink into me. On the 1-year anniversary of No is a full sentence, we hosted our first public storytelling event. Nathan spoke. Laura spoke. And I did too. For the first time, I told my story from start to finish. The room stayed quiet, listening, understanding. Afterward, a young woman approached with her sister by her side, her hands shaking. She thinks it's her fault they used her, she whispered. I looked her in the eyes. It's not. Months later, I went back to Helen's grave. I brought lavender sprigs, a ribbon Nathan had chosen, and the journal. I carried a framed photo from our workshop. The banner in the background read, "You are not too much. They were just not enough." I didn't stay long. Just long enough to thank her, to tell her she'd been right. And as I walked away, I smiled. Because I wasn't leaving empty. I was leaving whole.